Thank you all, and welcome to this session. At the end of the day, it is all about the arts, and really we're going to look at what is this creative and cultural economy. Just to give you a sense of what's been happening here in India, for about 9 years, because I have long hair, I sit on some of these boards and stuff like that. On behalf of FICCI, we were lobbying government to look at this sector much more seriously because there is no data. There's no data in terms of how many people are involved in the sector, how many people, what's the kind of primary and secondary income available from it, and what is this sector itself. What we understand is that this sector comes under 21 different ministries in India. Everything from the Ministry of Human Resources Development that looks at publishing to MEA, which looks after ICCR and all stuff in between. Our sense is that there are about 400 million people engaged in the creative and cultural economy in India, and yet that's not mapped. During COVID, one of the things that happened is because much of this sector is part of the gig economy and everything came to a standstill, we went to government and said, can you please look at helping, maybe picking up stock by the emporiums from all of these craftspeople, putting them online, and really just helping the craftspeople. There was no real understanding within government itself because I was told, why do artists need money? So I didn't quite get it. I thought they were yanking my chain. But when I brought it up again, they said, no, but Shah Rukh Khan and Sonu Nigam don't need money. So I went back to our colleagues in the office and said, I think we need to make people aware of what this sector means, and it's not the Shah Rukh Khans and the Sonu Nigams alone. It's all of the people who work, and we understand that especially in the craft and handloom and other traditions, it takes 1,000,000 times to build muscle memory. So whether you're a singer or a dancer or a performer or any of this, it takes that time. That is value, which we don't value. In India, in every street corner, and each one of us, we're storytellers, and from birth, from cradle to grave, we tend to celebrate the arts without ever really looking at putting a value to it. So that's some of the stuff that we want to unpack. And I'm going to start with Scott. Scott heads up the British Council worldwide. He's from the UK. And the UK, over the last 15 or 17 years, has been doing an enormous amount of work in this area. Professor Andy Pratt, in fact, is one of the great exponents and started the mapping process of this. But Scott, tell us a little bit about how you all imagine, or you've seen the area, and look at the growth and tell us in terms of GDP contribution, what is it for the UK?
So thanks, Sanjoy. And first of all, I just wanted to welcome you all and thank you for coming. There was a very exciting session on computer games in here before that was packed, and I was wondering how many people were going to come to hear about creative economy, money, and policy. So thank you for coming. The British Council's aim is to go out around the world and build connections, understanding, and trust. And one of the tools we use to do that is arts and culture. So we get a really good insight into the 100 countries we work in around the world. Where are they on the spectrum of thinking of arts and culture as just something about beauty and love that has nothing really to do with the economy and just goes on? Or have they thought about it as a serious part of the economy that needs to be nurtured, and they need to design government policy around to create jobs and wealth and success for people in the industry? And the UK was really at the forefront of this movement in the 1990s under the Tony Blair government, when we took a look at the industry and we said, this is a real business and it needs to be mapped. We need to understand where the industries exist, who's doing it, how much money they make, and it's only then that you can come up with a government policy that provides the direct funding that's needed, the local funding that's needed, the protections around IP that are needed, the plan to develop people to be in the creative industries that's needed. So we did all that then, and we've had various iterations since then. So we actually have a pretty good idea. And in the UK, the industry is worth about £125 billion a year. It's about 5% of the UK economy. It's growing twice as fast as most of the other sectors in the UK economy, and it employs 2 million people. And once you have those numbers, it means that as a government, you can be justified to fund it and support it and help it. And just as a bit of a provocation, I take Sanjoy's point that we don't really know the numbers in India because we haven't done the mapping. But the numbers we do have, which are a crude estimate, so the number that compares to that 125 billion in the UK, it's closer to 30 billion in India. You know, a country that should have more literature and history and philosophy and poetry. And I think it's more like 2 to 3% of the economy here. But a lot of people, 8% of the people, so hundreds of millions of people involved, which highlights, if we get the government policy right, just the potential there is in India.
So again, during COVID, the loss that was calculated from this sector was 3 trillion worldwide. That was the loss to the creative and cultural sector, to just give it a perspective. Shrabani, you've benefited to some extent from the whole creative sector economy in the UK, both within your writing as well as, of course, the films that were adopted from your, or adapted from your writing work.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's wonderful that the film industry in UK is supported so well. So
Is that a good thing or a bad thing, being
Good.
subsidized?
a good thing, very good thing, because you need all the funding in arts. I mean, not just films, you need them everywhere. I could get a really high-end, high-budget Universal Studios working title film made on my very little book, which, I was writing all alone, and I never thought it would go anywhere, called Victoria and Abdul, and then it went everywhere. And that was largely because, there was the funding. These period films need funding, and they could do it. And they did it on a grand scale. But the other side of it is that what was interesting is that it was filmed in Osborne House, which had never been opened to the public for filming. It's open to the public. It had never been open to film crews. So this was the first time film crews entered this place, and they could film in the Darbar Hall. I don't know, some of you may have seen this film, but they filmed in the actual location. And then when the film was popular, oh my goodness, the tourists arrived in hordes, and the curators, it's owned by English Heritage now, and they said, it's gone up like that, sky high. And they said the Americans were coming.
I mean, the interesting thing is Shrabani's book, Victoria and Abdul, it started because she saw this portrait hanging at Osborne House, and she wondered who this person, this tall turban person, was behind Queen Victoria. That's where it started.
That's true.
Max, Gary, museums in America, they find very little subsidy in the way that, say, in the UK or Europe, museums are subsidized. You have to go out and find your own money. You have to make sure that the museums pay. And there is a huge museum-going culture. So can I start by asking you, Max, why is it important for a museum to be a museum? And what does that mean? Because here in India today, we're coming of age in museums, and there's a museum in every district springing up, not necessarily for appropriate reasons, but to give a sense of a new narrative. But what's the role of the museum?
So I think that if you look at museums, the general answer to that would probably, yes, a museum is a preserver of objects. It's an institution that shares knowledge with you, that basically presents art, where you can appreciate ideas and art history. And that's all true. But I think what is even more important today, in our current time, is that a museum like the Met is a convener, is a place where you come together, where you jointly not only have an experience, but you can also learn about other cultures, and possibly you have even a discourse about it, maybe even a debate. And if I look at the current time, and we see some of the tensions even around the world, I think a museum, and especially also the Met, is a place where you can have a conversation, a dialogue, in a non-confrontational way between objects, between people, and between ideas. And I think that's just so important in our time of quick social media, confrontations, debate, etc. So I think a museum serves an enormous civic service, provides an enormous civic service. And as a keeper of objects, it's really also a keeper of histories, a keeper of knowledge, and it allows us to understand today and together move forward towards the future.
Able to to understand knowledge and understand different histories, etc. And really, stories travel. Those of you who read Josephine Quinn's book, How the World Made the West, really looked at how ideas traveled from the East through the Middle East into the Levant and then spread. Gary, ideas. You recently have taken this, the Ganga Jal jar from the city palace, which traveled to the UK during the coronation, and you took it to your museum, which has just recently closed. So it is about taking these wonderful stories and explaining to people. And yet at the same time, today we are hearing from America that we don't want other people's stories. We don't want other people. How do you see the sort of contrast now between what we're hearing and the kind of role that you've been playing? Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, well, several responses. Just because an individual has a loud megaphone doesn't mean they're speaking on behalf of the entire nation and reflecting of a common culture. So there's that. But I want to endorse everything that my colleague Max Hollein just said about the importance of museums and as a repository, not just of objects, but of history, and in many instances, national identity. And I was just thinking of an experience that I had completely unscripted now about 10 years ago in Moscow, when I was bringing some of my donors to see the great museums in Moscow. And on our itinerary had been the Museum of Russian History in Red Square, next to the Gum Department Store, next to St. Basil's. And our guide was leading us to the bus, and I said, no, we're going to the Museum of Natural History. No, you're not. And I said, yes, no, we've come all the way here. We're going to the Museum of Russian History. And she said, no, you can't. It's closed. So I said, okay, everyone's going to be disappointed. You're going to have to explain on the bus why we're not going to see this museum. And so she got the microphone, and a great Soviet tourist guide who has great experience, and she took her microphone and she said, this museum is closed, and it's been closed for some time. In most countries have an uncertain future, but in Russia we have an uncertain past. And because of that, our Museum of National History is closed. And so, it just reminds one, until you can agree on what your history is, it's difficult to have a museum, although Max directs an extraordinary museum that tells many stories, even about our own nation, a nation of immigrants. Now, I can't remember exactly what your question was about. Oh, the Ganga Jali. I just wanted to say, and again, it shows you the different attitudes. So we have this marvelous exhibition that just closed that was organized for us by Neil McGregor, former director at the British Museum and at the National Gallery London, one of the world's great polymaths in culture. And it was based on his very popular book and BBC radio series called Living with the Gods. And the exhibition is Living with the Gods, 5,000 years, different from the book, in the exhibition of works of art made by humans in order to communicate, to facilitate communication with their gods. And one of my donors, when I was speaking excitedly about this project in formation, she said to me, "You've got to work on your title, though. I don't think you can have an exhibition called Living with the Gods." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Well, don't you know there's only one God?" And I said, "You're a Christian, right?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Okay, tell me how many gods are mentioned in the Christian Bible." Well, that took her back. And I said, "I looked it up, and it's 170. So it says in the beginning, 'Thou shalt worship no other God before me.' But that doesn't mean that there aren't other gods. And surely you understand there are billions of people who are worshiping gods different than your own." We had the exhibition, and there was no criticism of it. And people were fascinated by the juxtaposition, and how we organized it is not by culture, not by chronology, not by religious faith, but rather by typology. So the cosmos, water, fire, and for water, of course, the Ganga Jali. It's the perfect example of living with your gods, because the Maharaja of Jaipur in 1903 needed to take Ganga water, holy water, with him in order to maintain his caste and his holiness.
His purity.
His purity, exactly. So that's precisely what museums are. Conveners that, I often liken them to car washes. You're going to come out different when you emerge from the museum, regardless of your intention or your own actions, you're going to be sprayed with encounters with objects with which you're unfamiliar, and that's going to change the way you think, even unconsciously.
How many of you have gone through a car wash museum here? How many of you visited the Met or the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston? A splattering. And how many of you visited any museum in India? Oh, not bad. I'm very impressed. Fabulous. Max, economics of museums. Museums like the Met. For those of you who don't know, the Met and the Museum of Fine Arts Houston is among the top 5 museums, largest collections in the United States, and it's gigantomous, both of them. Max, in terms of numbers, tell us a little bit about the economics of a museum.
Well, obviously, yes, we run a big institution. It's quite not only quite a show, but it's also a complex undertaking. You have 2,000 people working there. We take care of over 1.5 million objects. We do 50 exhibitions a year. And we are not only a museum as a physical space. We do a lot of projects all around the world. We engage in things that you will never see as a visitor, but that are important for a museum, like Gary's, like the one that I am heading, to do. We did a major, for example, fellowship program in and with India to train the next generation of conservators in this country for the last 12 years. So many things that we do. And the reason why we are doing also these many things is because in the US, there is not really a cultural ministry. There is not even like public funding. There are, you mentioned like 21 ministries are in charge of museums. We have 0, right? So I don't know if that's a blessing or a curse, but I would say that we are, in that sense, we have to be self-sustainable. And so the institution is non-for-profit, but it has to be totally funded through private sources. Which basically means we have an operating budget of currently around $340 million to running the operations. And a certain part of that is being just carried by what we call an endowment. So that's kind of the money that we have saved in the bank that carries us forward. The Met currently has an endowment of $4.5 billion, of which 5% a year gets to support the operating budget, which kind of helps us with about 30 to 40% of our cost. And the rest is being fundraised, and we also generate a certain amount of income through our entrance fees and ticket fees. But honestly, that's actually, it's not negligible, but it's actually a minor part of our operating budget, ticket sales and retail. What I think is also very meaningful and to understand, and there's even a difference than to some of the British institutions in that can, is that we are, besides operating a museum, American institutions are usually still and continue to be very active as collecting institutions. They get major gifts from collectors donating their works, but they also get major financial contributions to keep on collecting. And why is that so important? It's not so only important, it's not about amassing more stuff, but it's important to stay vibrant, to stay on time, to be part of a discourse and a dialogue about which objects of older cultures, of previous times need to be part of the dialogue, the conversation, but actually also how the contemporary art of today, Indian contemporary art, for example, can be properly reflected in a place like the Met. So our acquisition budgets and our annual donations that we get as gifts of art are really significant, and by no way there is a comparison to any other place, I have to say, in the world that is still so active in regard to further enriching the collections, not for the wealth of the institution, but more for the ability to tell broader, more global, more complex stories about all the cultures of the world and their development.
Gary, in recent times, museums have discovered Indian diaspora. Indian diaspora started donating to museums, thinking that these are the temples in America as opposed to the temples in India to which they donate. Is it a happy mix? Are
Oh,
you?
yes, absolutely. And so, we have a large and dynamic Indian diasporic population in Houston, and then add to that.
And some of them are here. Some of your donors are in
Yes,
this
I
room.
know, and delighted for that, and then add to that all of Central Asia. So whether it's Pakistani or people from the Gulf or North in Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, et cetera, we have a very rich culture of these populations, and each of the populations, many of them have representatives who have come to us over the years. And specifically asking to see their culture represented. So, like so many American museums, my museum just celebrated its 100th birthday, was founded in the image of what the founders, who were private individuals, almost all of them women in our instance, how they understood their own culture. So it was European culture transplanted to North America, and the collections and the narrative reflected their idea of their identity. By the end of the 20th century, the directors of the museum understood that that was no longer sufficient, that the city was changing around them, and therefore the identity of the new demographic spread needed to be represented. There's a wonderful story in my community where a number of representatives of very different Muslim communities came to the museum, came to see my predecessor in 2007 to say, we want to see, and this is post 9/11, so 6 years after that, we want to see is the beauty and the extraordinary accomplishment of Muslim culture and Islamic art represented here alongside all the other great civilizations. And we will, if you give us real estate, give us a gallery, and we will fill it with works of art. And they have. And we went, and thanks also to long-term loans from, for example, the Al Saba collection in Kuwait and other private collectors around the world, we now have 800 works of Islamic art on view. When I arrived, we had 36. We also have a brand new gallery, first time, and the second museum in the country to have a gallery dedicated for the ritual art of the Jewish religion, a gallery for Judaica. It happens to be right next door to the gallery galleries for Islamic art, much larger culture, many more objects. So these communities want to see themselves when they come to the museum, and all of us in America now strive to achieve that.
Shrabani, the CIA for a very long time, their stated policy was that if there was a film that talked about the American flag and Americanism, they supported that film with a 20 or 25% grant. I mean, they funded the film 20, and at the back of that, they sold Coca-Cola and whatever, and McDonald's or burgers, etc. In many ways, not just about smart or soft power, but about the smart power. Films shape people and ideas. Films are about stories. Tell us a little bit about that, and why is it that the UK, in the shaping of stories in recent times, have fallen short? And it's all about America.
It's funding, isn't it? A lot of independent filmmakers have all been crying out for funding. They need the BFI supported. So ultimately, it does come down to filming. But a lot of independent small films, which don't need large budgets, are still being made in the UK, and they are popular. I mean, it's interesting that the UK's entry for in the international Oscar category was actually a film made in India by a UK Asian woman, and that was a first time that a Hindi film has been sent. So I think the era is also, now you have multiple producers, so I think it is the time to have really collaborative ventures between countries, because these themes,
But selling Britishness or selling a general culture or chicken tikka masala?
Britishness has become, as you say, a very composite term now. It's no longer just the country houses anymore. It's smaller stories as well as things like Victoria and Abdul, and then you have an Abdul Karim there from Agra.
Scott British Council used to be the epitome of British culture across the world. That was your purpose. But in recent times, you've literally had to sell the family silver. You're selling its art collection, etc. Do you see that governments are looking at you with lots less value because of this what is British identity, and therefore what is your role as the British Council?
So I'm going to come back to that question. I just want to start by saying how interesting this panel is, because there's two different worlds here. Like in the US, they have this wonderful tradition of philanthropy that can actually fund these enormous and fantastic institutions. I think there's almost nowhere else in the world that has the tradition that's that strong. So the rest of us need some philanthropy, and we really need government policy and some government to support. And I think there are examples. I wanted to roll this one out today because I think it's really relevant for India. If you look over the last 10 years, I have a daughter who's 20 now, and when she was 12, she came to me and said, Dad, all of a sudden I have a new favorite band. It's a K-pop band, and I'm going to learn Korean, and this is my new favorite movie. And Korea, about a decade ago, took a conscious choice to map the creative industries, invest in them, coordinate policy, support them, and particularly support them on the export front around the world. And look where they are now. I mean, they've made lots of people successful. They've changed the perception of South Korea around the world. They've generated jobs, wealth, and they've actually changed Korea from I think, a soft power perspective. Everyone knows about South Korea now, and they visit and they trade and they do all these things. So that's why what you're talking about, the initiatives here, are so important. It's a bit like the William Dalrymple presentation yesterday on the Golden Road. I mean, if only the history was known and shared, that the opportunities are unlimited. Now, coming back very briefly to the British Council, I mean, the UK is in a tough spot in a sense, because we're not the US with enormous philanthropy, and we're not Europe, which has a little more government funding for things. So we sit in the middle. And our government at the moment is a little strapped for cash in general. And we're caught up in that, and we're still out there doing what we do, building connections, understanding, and trust. I think the mission is still strong and it's still effective. But like everyone else, we have some money challenges, and some of those we need to deal with ourselves, and some of them we need to make a really strong case to the government to help us out, and that's what we're doing.
Edinburgh, for example, contributes, the Edinburgh Festivals, which is 5 or 6 different festivals in Edinburgh, contributed last year $237 or $277 million of additional income to the city of Edinburgh. The West End contributes about 1.1 billion pounds into the economy of London. When you're looking at figures like that, why is it that places like, say, Birmingham haven't got their act together and looking at this as a possibility, but Manchester has? I recently went out to a conference, I think, that was partly British Council supported, and I was blown away by the amount of money that had been invested into superstructures for the arts in Manchester, bringing about a huge revival in what I remembered to be a really tardy, grubby city.
So I think many cities in the world have this challenge. They were big manufacturers, so the city was full of warehouses and designed to manufacture, and those industries have now died. That would include the north of Manchester, the south of Birmingham, and even in London in a place like Spitalfields. And maybe if I talk about Spitalfields, that used to be textile and furniture, all gone now, they don't make it. But then the place is just left with warehouses. So what did Spitalfields do? You know, they tried to attract all the British artists to come, and they gave them warehouses and said, these are wonderful studios, they're wonderful places to make film or store things. And they attracted that whole young movement of British artists, the Damien Hirsts and the Tracy Emmonds. They set up in Hoxton and spread around Spitalfields. And now it's a really, it's an artistic, dynamic community, and everything builds on that. You get bars and restaurants, and the whole thing gets regenerated. And I think that has happened in north of Manchester, as you described. And they're trying to make it happen in the south of Birmingham. I think they're just a step behind.
Max, is technology, AI, and access to museums like Google Arts, for example, is that a threat to actually people coming to the museum? Is that a problem for you all, or do you look at it yet as another platform to be able to make all of this work accessible?
Well, I would first say to this that, of course, AI is everywhere, and we are part of the system, and it will kind of improve a lot of the ways that how we operate, and are able to not only process our own work, but actually also disseminate knowledge and be more accessible. So I mean, of course, the whole world is in this development, and museums have to, should be, and can be too. So I think that's just a given. But it is important for us to be an institution and as a museum that is accessible not only through a physical visit. Yes, we want to welcome you all to New York City and to make sure that you can see the Met and all its galleries and the objects. But the museum is, of course, also more than objects. The museum is basically also a place of ideas, a place of education, a place of engagement. So our many different digital platforms allow an accessibility towards all of that 24/7. And so in a way that I want to make sure that the museum is basically really being seen as something that happens and can happen way beyond our walls. And in that sense, we are embracing these opportunities, have embraced them for quite a long time. Running, of course, our own YouTube channels, running our own platforms, have established probably the most profound website for art history as a major research tool, the Hollein timeline of art history, and are active on all different social media channels with stories, with narratives, with engagement, with ways how you can experience the museum as a place, but actually also have a deeper understanding of objects. What I want to say also probably in that context is that we are all for being able, that you are able to appreciate an object in its artistic excellence, in its aesthetic merit. But we want to also make sure that you can see that this object lived and can live also in a complex environment. That objects usually, besides the art historical context, have social, political, historical context, economical as well. So for you to fully not only be able to read an object, but really to understand how that kind of actually influences the way how you can understand the world, you want to make sure that you can see these additional layers. I would say digital platforms allow us in many different ways to almost like a Russian doll, allow you to go deeper, 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 deeper into this understanding of cultures as a whole, as it's encapsulated often in just one object. And that's just the magic of storytelling and the magic of narratives.
Gary, is there an argument for museums now to come together? There's this continued debate about British Museum and Greece, Indian objects all across the world. You yourself in Houston is your museum. There's the Manel collection, there's the Rothko, there's so many. Is there this argument that we can come together and share pieces of work, or is it still, this is mine and I will hang on to it?
I think it depends on who your interlocutor is, but obviously our museums are based on the principle that there is a world heritage, and that we spend lots of money every year to make it available to, we call the motto for our museum is a place for all people, and we act on that every day. So it's central to our identity, and yes, there will be people who say this comes from there and it must go back there. Often if ignorant is the wrong word, they refuse to acknowledge the fact that people and objects have moved around the globe for
like the Kohinoor.
Well, but I mean,
it has. It's gone from,
yes.
who does it belong to? Afghanistan,
yes.
Pakistan,
Right.
India.
Yeah. We all come from Africa, right?
Oh, and we all come from
We all come from Africa. And so the idea that people have to stay in one lane or one box is, to me, preposterous, given the history of the world. And when people have moved across the planet, as they have, they bring objects with them, and they trade them, and they hit each other over the head with them, and that's the history of objects. So, yes, museums often have evidence of tremendous crime, but crimes invented by humanity. And so if you want to understand what humanity is, what human beings are, what they're capable of doing, it's making objects of great beauty, and also capable of enormous destruction.
Great horrors.
Yeah.
Great horrors.
Yeah.
I'm going to open it up in a second. Just 1 second. I'm going to ask Shrabani one. Shrabani, to create value for the creative and cultural sector and all of what we've been talking about, we need the media. Yet we are seeing more and more the media shrinking space for what they don't consider is something that they can leverage for money or advertising. What is your, Shrabani is also, or primarily also a journalist apart from being a writer. So wearing your hat, What is it that you can do? I mean, you've been at the back of this for three and a half decades.
Sure. But before I come to the media, I just want to, follow up on Gary's. I think the important thing here when we talk about objects as well is inclusivity. How do we make museums inclusive for people? And I'll just give a very small example, very briefly. The Wallace Collection in London, which is very exclusive, very European, hosted a Ranjit Singh exhibition.
Stunning exhibition.
And there is this banner of Ranjit Singh outside, and it just strikes you that this is the Wallace Collection. And for the first time ever, I saw busloads of Sikh families coming, children, grandparents. I would just stand there sometimes, just watch them, because it was fascinating. Suddenly they realized that this is something that belongs here. A lot of the objects are in the UK, but this is our heritage. And I think
Written out of the UK history for a while. Now it's coming back.
now it's coming back. So I think inclusivity, along with the objects, bring people together,
Well, those objects will, as you say, will
Yeah.
bring people into your house.
Exactly, yeah. So sorry to go.
Media.
Media, yes. Well, media is
Conduct that.
guilty of many things, and that's it. I think it's the funding that follows the media. It's the media owners that follow.
What's the
get directive.
responsibility? We know all the reasons why you don't cover it. What's the responsibility of the media?
Well, I sit on the other side, and I would love everything to be covered, but it's often the
Do we need
editors.
to get
I think the pages are shrinking. I see less and less book review pages in Indian media, arts, everything, and the same is there, in the UK.
less and less questions? We'll take them in clusters and then we'll pass them around. So just hold. So Mohit, Mr. Mamraj here at the back. Start with him, and please short questions and no
Very
statements.
short. An ethical question, not for those who are funded by philanthropy. Government revenues are always tight. In a poor country, sorry, I need to stand up.
Because
okay?
of the cameras, Mohit.
Yeah, I need to stand up. So, government funding is always tight. In a country which has extreme poverty, should there be funding for the arts?
So should they be funding for the arts? Hold that, Mamraj, the gentleman there, the jeweler. Yeah. Chota.
छोटा मैं तो मेरा एक छोटा सा आर्ट लाया हूँ बस दिखाना
वो तो हम दिखा देंगे at the end. The lady in the red.
नहीं मैं बोलता हूँ मैं बना
The lady with the red
एक्चुअली
jacket.
कोहिनूर इज फ्रॉम गोलकुंडा और मिस्टर दुलीप सिंह
Question. सवाल पूछो. Yeah, the lady in this lady in the.
Thank you for such a wonderful session. When you talk about accessibility because of technology, you can argue that there's a negative aspect of that with AI and how everyone can quote unquote create now. My question to you is, how do you see the policy that will protect artists from this? And at all, if there will be regulation, because the leaders of these corporations have so much political lobbying power now. So do you see that being any regulation?
So let's just take to this and then I'll come at that side. Anybody wants to take that question? Go ahead, Scott.
So I'll take the first one. I mean, I could go on and on and on about sort of moral and cultural reasons to fund the arts. But let's just talk about it as a business for a second. I think that gives you the answer already. And that was, I think, the big step the UK took. Instead of having a constant debate about, should we fund literature because it's a wonderful thing and it shares ideas, they said that, well, the singers we have here, the Rolling Stones or the Beatles, the famous authors we have, the famous films we kick out, these are serious businesses that generate employment and wealth for the country. And if we can put a picture around that with the facts and show the government, what the government's doing is investing. They're not, this isn't philanthropy on their part, they're investing and they will get many returns over if it's done well.
And maybe I can talk about the AI question. I see the issues, and I see also some of the discourses that are happening. I just think that in this essence, AI is part of our way how we move forward as a society and also where technology is going. So you have this very same, almost like challenges as well as fears that you might have had in the late 19th century about photography, or also in the maybe the 70s and 80s about computer. And so I think that the way we will deal with it is we have to adjust, and also it will certainly further foster, honestly, some of the traditional means of art. I mean, how often has painting, has that already been declared dead? and it basically continues as a prime art form and basically as a means of expression. But I think there are also a lot of opportunities for artistic expression that is being fueled, supported by, and maybe even kind of orchestrated through AI. I think we are at the beginning of a new age in regard to that context.
Let's take a question right at the back. Do you want to stand up, the gentleman with the glasses? Yeah. Give him the mic and then I'll come to the front. I'm coming. And then one mic here in front.
Hi, so this is just to follow on with the response we just had, if someone else in the panel can maybe put
Quick
their thoughts on.
question.
I
Yeah.
just wanted to ask that considering generative AI itself is facing a lot of challenges about copyright and about using the current works of artists and misappropriating them in the generation of art, I just wonder if there is a discussion in the artistic community and if the panel can put light on it about the fact that generative AI can actually be harmful for artists because it's
Generative AI harmful for artists. We did discuss a little bit of it last day before yesterday, I think. Go ahead.
Just a quick one. While we wait for our British and American visas, can we expect the Met and the British museums to collaborate and bring some of their collections to India? We just gave Coldplay $50 million.
Collections to India, the former governor of the island.
You've talked a lot about the interface between the arts community and government in terms of funding. Governments take notice of the public. Is there more the arts community should do to engage with the public in order to convince the government?
Who wants to take that? Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to try. So in regard to generative AI and the copyright issues, there are issues for sure, and I think that will be will probably be tried to be dealt with certain level of legislation. However, it's a very fast-moving environment, and you will see ways how, so to say, both producers as well as, so to say, algorithms will adjust to that, and there will be mistakes, there will be some issues, but to a certain extent, we have to see that this is a technology that will kind of basically support everything that we do, and it will be something that we need to kind of weave into our whole mechanism of doing and be part of that. In regard to should artists do more of that, I think artists, in a sense, always lead the way. But I think I would never want to task them. I don't know if that was exactly the question, but I would never want to task them with any kind of thing that they have to do in order to get more public support.
But to me, it's entirely a commercial question. In other words, part of the artist's revenue traditionally has been through copyright protection and royalties and revenues that derive from that legal protection. Now, other companies wish to make money by using a product that they themselves have not created. And yet, if one wanted to appropriate their algorithm, watch out. So it's a matter of finding appropriate compensation for those creators, and this has been a perennial problem throughout recorded history, that artists have traditionally been undercompensated. So we need as a society to compensate artists, but at the same time, as an artist, I would hate to have my art behind a paywall and not included in the history of the world. So we've got to bring all of this into the information economy, but we have to make sure that artists are properly compensated.
Sanjoy, can I just very quick answer to this question as well? Because one of the things that happens when you really take the creative economy seriously and you try and map it and measure it, it mainly consists of thousands and thousands of small companies or individuals. And as you do that mapping and gather the information and get them focused, I think some of that happens naturally because they realize they're in clusters of other artists or clusters in small localities or in cities. And without having to put the thumb on them and say, go out there and market yourselves, that happens naturally, I think.
I'm sorry we run out of time. This is a conversation, as you can see, can carry on and we can do many sessions. Before I close it, I again wanted to place a perspective. I was in Hong Kong a couple of weeks ago and met with the Chinese officials from mainland who said to me in one of their interactions, they had a problem which they were asking some help for. And they said, we've decided to invest $200 billion into building arts and museum infrastructure in the greater Hong Kong Bay Area and the mainland space, primarily because we think that we need to talk about Chinese culture in a way that changes the narrative that the West has of China. They have the money, and as he said about uncertain, it's about the uncertain past and in many ways coming home to roost here as well. What will that do to the world, say, 100 years down the line? How will it change the narrative is stuff that we also need to look at. I wish we had more time to talk about it. And of course, Mohit's great theory keeps telling us, you know, teamwork is a company. And one of the things Mohit says that should we be a company or should we look at the arts primarily from people, from philanthropy, and make sure that that's the way to go forward. These are unanswered questions, but ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Scott, Max, Shrabani Basu, and Gary Tinterow. Thank you all so much.